Excellent. All right, welcome everyone for what I guess is our second real one of these. Second one that we think might actually be informative and entertaining and semi-professional, at least in quality. We've explained this before, but just for the benefit of anyone who's new, this is uncharted territory for us. It's obviously something that we're doing. In the beginning, it was intended to just be a temporary thing, and I think there's a chance that in the future we'll do this in addition to our open houses that everyone's become so accustomed to and that we're so fond of, where we have you up visiting us, we're talking to you in person about the wines and stuff like this. But we've had some positive feedback from some club members who don't live in the area and kind of enjoy this, so we may do both in the future. Who knows? I'm less uncomfortable with it at this point. Nathan, how about you?
Getting there. Yeah.
You can live with it? Okay.
All things considered, it's about as good as we're going to get right now. So it's kind of a fun way to connect, taste some wines, and keep you guys in the loop with what's going on here. So we'll work with it.
Excellent. And I'll be with you today. I'm Tommy Fogarty Jr. The Vineyard, the winery was obviously started, or obviously or not, it was started by my father, Tom Fogarty Sr. Nathan Candler is with us.
Hey, hello. I've been working for the Fogarty family since 2004, helping to farm the vineyards and helping to make the wine. So, and then we're also joined by my mentor and the gentleman who I worked for 9 years, excuse me, Michael Martella, the founding winemaker at Fogarty.
Hello, I'm Nathan Ted, I'm the founding winemaker, and started with Tommy's father in 1980, and had the privilege of planting a lot of the vineyards and designing and building the winery. So here we are, and Nathan took over the winemaking. What was that, 2011? We've been actually making the wines together for a long time before then anyway. And I totally retired from Fogarty Winery in June 1st, 2019.
Just in time. Just in time to avoid the pandemic and the broadcast from the catacombs.
That's right.
So today, as we mentioned last week, we're going to try 2 Chardonnays, which turned into 3 Chardonnays. One of which is going to be, they're all 3 2017 vintage wines. And the Albutom, which is our smallest Chardonnay vineyard, I'll have Nathan tell you about it in a moment here. But Martella, you've not tried this wine at all before, ever since it went in the bottle, right? So this will be your first time tasting the 2017 Albutom Vineyard Chardonnay, yeah?
Yes, I haven't tried the Albutom, and I haven't tried the Damiana either, the 17s. I think I tried it when they were first made, but I haven't tried it since they've been bottled.
All right. Well, we're going to do Albutom, Damiana, and Langley Hill, right? We have a bottle of Langley here. Okay, on its way down. Cool. Nathan, you want to talk about the 3 vineyards, and maybe Michael, you can talk about the history. I'm going to pour a bit for myself and for Nathan.
Michael, why don't you talk about the history, since you were around when they were either just planted or you actually did plant them. We got a little technical difficulty here. Well, so for those of you that don't know, there are 4 kind of distinct Chardonnay vineyards that sort of ring the winery property here, the winery itself. And those 4 Chardonnay vineyards are Albutom, Damiana, Portola Springs, and Langley Hill. And I think to me, one of the most amazing things that I figured out pretty quickly when I came to work here was that even though those vineyards are quite close in proximity, and they kind of sort of look more or less the same to the untrained eye, the wines that each of those vineyards made was so distinctive And the way that Michael had been farming him and making the wine was more or less the same. So all those distinct differences really came from the soil that they were planted in, the way in which they interacted with their environment. And to me, that's just one of those aha moments really in the wine industry. And it was so specific and distinctive here because those vineyards were so close together. So Michael, you want to talk about the history and the planning of them?
Sure. And excuse me, my beats keep fading in and out, so hopefully they stay connected for the moment. So
Dr. Gray's got to get that fixed.
Yeah, exactly. So Albutom was planted in 1981, and actually the first year that I started at the winery. And I think we touched on it briefly last time, but it was named Albutom because while Julio and I and maybe 3 other guys could have planted the vineyard in the afternoon, Dr. Fogarty decided to have a planting party and invited about 35 of his close friends, and everybody showed up except Dr. Fogarty. So that's Albutom. Albutom, a lot of the other vineyards, Damiana was the very first vineyard planted. It was started in 1978, somewhere around there. And then Albutom was one of the last Chardonnay vineyards to be planted in 81. And historically, we haven't been making a single vineyard Albutom until about, what was it, Nathan, around 2004?
2004, we bottled an Albutom, a Portola Springs, a Langley Hill, and a Damiana, I think all for the first time, right?
Yeah, I think that's correct. So, and we've been doing an Albutom, I think we've done almost every year since then.
There was not enough fruit in 15, but I think you're right. I think every other year since then.
I'm looking forward to trying the 17.
Yeah. So Albutom is the smallest of all of really about the smallest of any vineyard we farm. It's probably less than half an acre in size. It sort of has a cooler exposition. It sort of has an east to northeast, probably facing exposure. And it's planted in some of the rockiest soil on the property. So it's mostly fractured shale, Lambert shale, with a little bit of sandstone. And this is, it's maybe 1 barrel, and in I think only 2 vintages, we were able to produce 2 barrels. So it's 25 or 50 cases. It's the most limited production wine we make on an annual basis.
It's pretty much what, Trellis, it's still kind of the same way as Damiana and Portola Springs.
Yeah, it's double Guillot, so 2 short canes that are pruned back every year.
We've got a lot of questions backed up, and so I apologize. We're not going to go through them in chronological order, but we can all see them, and we'll try to touch on them as we go along. And when Matt Ryan asks incredulously if the Nebbiolo block is larger, and yeah, it is a little bit. That Albutom vineyard is really tiny.
Hey, Michael, before we started making a single vineyard wine, did you ever put Albutom into the old reserve Chardonnays?
I don't remember ever doing that. I think mostly the reserves came from Damiana.
Okay. So the Albutom in the past would have just gone into the estate bottling or the Santa Cruz Mountain bottlings, probably.
Yeah, the estate Santa Cruz Mountains.
Yep. This is always a wine that really speaks to me. I like the style. It's got all the freshness and acidity that we kind of expect from this property. And it has just enough sort of California, like sun-kissed fruit. But there's a texture and a real intensity to this wine that I really love.
Well, it really has a real nice brightness. And the nose is really kind of refreshing. all the Santa Cruz Mountain wines do have a little bit of they always have a little bit of something that always reminds me a little bit of a forest. It's a little, mushroom's not the right word, but there's kind of a freshness to them. This kind of reminds me a little bit like coming upon like a meadow with like wildflowers. There's a little bit of that beautiful sweetness to the wine.
So we've had a couple of questions about like general soil questions, and that's a wormhole that would be a lot of fun to go down. But what I can say about that overall is for those that haven't been up here, once we can have you all back and you can come up, we do periodically vineyard walks and sort of tours through the vineyards, and we do one that is through all 4 of the Chardonnay vineyards, and we will talk a lot about the soil composition in each of those vineyards. And it's a really pretty interesting thing. Nathan was mentioning that there's like a Lambert shale and some sandstone. This is very much, right at the fault line, Pacific Plate, sandy stuff, and there's mixed in basalt. There's even a little volcanic stuff, but that's very like localized within different vineyards. But that's a hard one to get into kind of in the context that we have here, but we do invite everybody to come up and kind of see how that affects these wines and the vineyards in which they're grown. Yes, Alex, you do need a couple dozen oysters right now. These wines are often enjoyed that way.
So there's a couple questions actually about élevage, how the wines are made, and lees, how we work the lees. And for those of you that don't know, the lees are basically the spent yeast cells after the fermentation are finished. The lees sort of slowly settle to the bottom of the barrel. And then the lees is sort of that sediment that builds up in the bottom of the barrel. And that people talk about lees a lot with Chardonnay. So these wines are fermented without any additions. So basically we bring the grapes to the winery in the morning. They're pressed into a tank. They go then to barrels, all French oak, but and this wine has 0% new oak because it's such a small production. But in a bigger lot, even we may be at 20% new oak. The natural fermentation occurs in the barrel. Then the malolactic fermentation occurs in the barrel. And we usually leave our Chardonnays in oak for between 10 and 14 months. And then they go sometimes with and sometimes without the lees into stainless steel. And so I like to think about it when they're young, we let the wines breathe and open up. And then towards the end of their life, we want to tighten them and focus them back in the steel. And we don't work the lees at all. We leave the wines on the lees, but we don't stir. That's a process called batonnage. And some people will do that. You'll stir the barrel, and that kind of builds more richness to the wine. But I think I like leaving the wine on the lees, but without stirring, because we get some bit of richness, but we also keep the wines more focused.
Back when we first started making these in 2004, we were stirring the lees. And I think, there goes my phones.
We do hear you, Michael, with or without your plugs in. I don't know if you've got a speaker on the computer. So somebody here, I can't see their entire name, but they're mentioning that while some of us are trying the 17 Albutom, they've got a 2013 open. And that to me, that's one of my favorite vintages of these Chardonnays in general and the Albutom in particular. These last quite a long time. I was telling Todd Parmasek earlier, who's also with us, that we routinely will have Chardonnays from the 1990s. You can tell they're aged wines, but they really are. They're fantastic and very intact, and they still typically have quite a bit of acidity, which not all California Chardonnays are that way, but I'm imagining that 13 is fantastic right now.
Martella, this is your first time having the 17 Albutom in, maybe probably since bottling. What do you think?
Well, I really like the freshness. It's funny because you were saying this doesn't have any new oak, right? It's a one barrel, so you don't want to give it a new oak. So what is this, like a 3-year-old barrel?
I think it's actually a barrel and a half.
What
Yeah, so I think it was 2 second fill barrels.
What I love about this wine is the Chardonnay character really coming through.
Yeah.
It's not convoluted with oak. And not that wine have to be convoluted with oak, but it's really the purity of the wine really comes through. I really like that about the wine.
Martella may be a cyborg, everyone. You can tell from the audio.
Oh, the audio keeps coming in and out.
Yeah, it's a little robotic. Might be Terminator.
The moment I take those off, I'll come back on again. So if you want to know what I think of the Albutom?
Yes.
I've been practicing.
This is what you do in retirement, huh? Yeah, take notes. Oh, wow.
A 94? Or does it say 49?
No, well, hopefully you got it right. Hopefully it's not 49.
Thank you, Michael.
There you go.
Yes, he is like Randy Jackson. So,
we've got some pictures, so bear with us. This is us really going on a limb. This hopefully will work. So Tommy, who's this?
So that is my mom in the amazing hat, and that is a lady named Mary Martin on in front of her, and this is planting the Albutom vineyard. Like Michael said, everyone except my father showed up. He was watching we're trying to remember or figure out through some sort of investigative process what he was watching on TV, but it was a sporting event. We have to kind of narrow it down by figuring out exactly what time of year the vineyard was planted. It's clearly warm out. It might have been a baseball game. We don't know, but he no-showed and let his wife do the work and a bunch of his friends.
And you.
Yeah, and me, of course.
I remember you being there. You were about like 12 years old.
Yeah, child labor has always been it's one of the cornerstones on which this winery is founded.
Exactly.
He did not go fishing. That I know. He was home.
He was watching the 49ers.
Okay, so it was during football season, maybe, and the reason I know that, or one of the reasons I know that, is Lee Frimmersdorf, who was also a real fixture and put in some blood, sweat, and tears to plant these vineyards. He mysteriously left a little bit early, and when we got to my house, we found him and my dad watching. I don't remember what, and then Chan Flickinger, who I always feel compelled to mention because he was such a character and was always around when this vineyard was started. He actually named it Albutom.
He was your neighbor.
That's right.
One of your closest neighbors.
Yeah. Yep. Are we through the slideshow already, Dushan, or did we hijack it?
No, I think we went through the whole Albutom slide.
Okay.
So that's Albutom there. Oops.
Yep.
There you go.
And that's Chan's sign, right?
That's Chan's sign.
Chan made the sign, right?
That's correct. Yeah, that sign needs to be redone right now.
Well,
it's really
only like 30, what is that? Almost 40 years old.
Yeah.
39 years old.
Yep. It's brand new. I don't know why it looks so bad.
It's looked like that since the day I got to the winery, though. So it almost feels like we should just leave it.
Yeah,
it's been painted a few times.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, the vineyard there, when we first started growing grapes up there, we didn't, a lot of these vineyards were planted by UC Davis's recommendations. And those recommendations, most of their research was done in the Napa Valley floor or the Central Valley. So the first trellis systems based on their recommendations were totally all wrong. So if you notice that vineyard, the fruiting wire is very high. That's because it's been retrellised about twice to really get things correct. But it took us a while.
Ted Peterson asks if our process is ever evolving. And I think it is, or at least it's ever changing. It evolves, it devolves, it moves laterally, it steps forward a couple of steps or a half a step every so often. But I would answer that question by saying that there is movement always. Like, we're certainly not trying to make the same wine every vintage. There are probably a bunch of wineries, a bunch of producers that do that now. But it doesn't sound fun to us. And we're fortunate to have a group of kind of loyal club members and customers that expect each vintage to be a little bit different and a little bit reflective of what's gone on that year. And we may adopt new ideas of farming or, whatever. We're certainly not anchored to anything.
Well, on that subject, I think Nathan's pretty much have hit his stride in, I don't think you deviate a lot from how you make these Chardonnays from the last few years.
Now, I feel like when we first started working together, we I feel like with a lot of kind of things, we did almost like a shotgun approach where we experimented a lot and we kind of figured out the things that, we thought worked best. And so we kind of have I think the basic frameworks of things. And then every vintage, I think you get, a curveball here and there with regards to certain things. And that was the best part for me about working with you, is that I felt like you'd seen everything. So, one year you were like, oh, well, the vines are reacting this way to this heat or to this stress. And you sort of had that in your toolbox. So it was good that we had this sort of, you're kind of driving along, it's like driving a car. You kind of know what you're doing, but something jumps in front of you in the road, you got to swerve every once in a while. So I would say, like, one of the things we've done with the lees is some years we'll leave the wine on the lees for the whole year, or the whole élevage, the year and a half. And other times we might pull it off a few months early if we think the wine is rich enough. So the basic framework of the winemaking is more or less the same, but we'll react to particular conditions. I love this wine, but should we move on to Damiana next? It's hard to dump this out, but
I'm
gonna pour for you guys, and then I'm gonna hold this label up. So Damiana's was the first vineyard we planted, and actually, it was intended to be the only vineyard in the very beginning. When my father and a couple of his friends had the idea they were gonna plant a vineyard and start making wine, the Damiana was going to be the vineyard. It made a lot of sense. It had the right exposure. There was absolutely no there were no trees in there that were difficult to remove. It was all a scrub brush called coyote brush, like a chaparral type of plant. And they cleared it. And as soon as they cleared it, they kind of thought, well, that was fun and that wasn't very difficult, so let's move on. And then they went to the Langley Hill vineyard, which will be the third wine we try. But this was intended to be the first of the vineyards, or the only vineyard originally. Michael, Martello, you have anything to add there historically?
Well, this is the only vineyard also that has probably a couple of different clones of Chardonnay and a couple of different rootstock. There's some St. George rootstock. This is ARX1. But It does have a little bit more diversity in that vineyard than the rest of the vineyards.
Yes, Josh Harmson, it's always been Chardonnay. It was originally
Yes.
grafted to the Wente Chardonnay clone, and it's been that way ever since.
Damiana, I would say, is one of the wines that maybe has changed the most over the years, Michael, wouldn't you say, when we started making this in '04 to what this is like today? I think it's
I think we were picking it riper back in '04. So I think it was probably even a little bit more tropical and rich, a little fatter than our style more is today.
yeah, I
The
think
vines have also gotten a lot older,
yep.
and it's hard to get much of a crop in that vineyard. So I think that's really affecting the wines, maybe making the wines a little bit more concentrated, not rich particularly, but more concentrated, more complex.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've done is I think the vineyard has been the yield, like you said, the yield coming down a little bit. I think one of the things that was always crazy about this is even though we were picking it really ripe, it's always had a ton of acid.
Mm.
And so now I think we can get the acid in balance at a little bit lower sugar when we pick. So the wine is a little more compact and a little more elegant. I think in the past, some of those older vintages were really bombastic. They were really showy, but sometimes they were a little heavy. But this, I really like the direction that this wine has gone.
So Matt Ryan is asking about choosing the rootstocks. And honestly, Matt, I think the truth is AXR1 was kind of the de rigueur rootstock. It's sort of what was available at that time, and most people were using it. And yeah, it was blamed, maybe not entirely justifiably, for a lot of the phylloxera problems in California subsequent to that. We now sort of know that phylloxera susceptibility has a lot to do with soil composition as much or nearly as much as the clonal selection or the rootstock selection rather. But the soil up here is really gravelly. There's no clay. It drains really, really well. So knock on wood, we've never had phylloxera issues with this rootstock.
You also have to remember, though, in the 70s when this was planted, there were only about two choices of rootstock, right? It was AXR or St. George. It's not like the toolbox of rootstocks that we have today. There weren't very many choices.
And somebody asked about the barrel treatment of this wine versus the Albutom, the first one we tried. You guys want to speak to that?
So this was 8 barrels. So of those 8 barrels, I think 2 were new. So it's about 25% new oak, which is pretty common. We typically don't use a whole lot more than that on something. We run into a little bit of problems when we have really small blocks or small lots of wine. If you only have 3 or 4 barrels, your choices of percentage of new oak is pretty small.
These are pretty interesting wines to contrast with each other. You definitely, with Albutom, you really do sense that the oak regime is really just a very, very light touch. And it's a light touch on the Damiana too, but you do sense a little bit more of an oak treatment in the Damiana.
It's just a bit richer wine too in general. I mean, there's been a few vintages recently where the Damiana is in consideration for my favorite of the single vineyard Chardonnays in the vintage, and 17 I think is, it's in the conversation in this vintage for sure. It's got real density, but it doesn't lack any of the energy that you find in some of our other single vineyard Chardonnays. I myself, I don't know that I've tried back-to-back 17s against each other ever until right now, actually.
I think I said it the last time we were talking about it. 17 is one of my favorite vintages for Chardonnay, probably since 13. The wines just have really good tension. They're really bright and focused. I think the wines are going to be great for a long time.
Matt, it's more than 8 feet between rows, right? What's the spacing between the rows?
I think it's 10 or 11.
It's like 12 feet.
Yeah, it's wide.
Yeah, these vineyards, Matt, are really, they're not densely planted. And that was, if you think back to the 1970s, even up here, land was inexpensive, and it was expensive to get specialized tractors for narrow rows. So a lot of people planted very wide. We absolutely, if we were going to replant, and of course, eventually everybody does replant, we will go with higher density planting, I think. Don't you think, Nathan?
Yeah, I mean, Michael said this earlier, but when this property was planted in the late 70s, cold climate or cool climate viticulture in California was really in its an early stage. So we basically I'm assuming they took what they knew about planting grapes in Davis and Fresno and Napa, which are warmer areas, and then transferred them up here because that's how you planted a vineyard. But over time, as we grow in knowledge and learn about, farming particular varieties in these more extreme climates, now we know that, especially with Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, planting them at much higher densities makes the farming and the quality of the wine probably one of the biggest issues you run into, and we're seeing this in our old vineyards, is that the yields become so drastically low because each vine, its production falls. And when you have such a, low number of vines per acre, your overall yields really contract. If you have, 3 or 4 times the number of vines per acre, you have a little bit more leeway. You can still ask each vine to do a little bit less, but have, a greater amount of wine for the given area. Somebody, I think, asked where Damiana was on the property, and this is the view from Damiana off the pavilion at our events facility. So if you've ever been to, you can see there it is below. If you've been to our wine releases at the events facility, or been to a corporate event or a wedding, standing on the pavilion looking out, that is Damiana, the original vineyard. And it is, it's important to us. I think it was the original vineyard here, so it holds a special place, I think, for all of us because of the, it's first, it's the first site.
Thank you, Joy, for checking in with Betsy at It's Italia. That's cool. I hope they're doing okay over there. Nathan, David Hodges has a question about acid in the vineyards. He's in the Q&A section here.
The question is, how does acid play as a factor in the vineyards? Is one of the vineyards or blocks more acidic than the other? Just from a chemical standpoint, the vineyards that always have the highest acidity are Portola Springs and Damiana. Albutom is a close second, and Langley Hill would maybe be the last. I mean, they're all probably, compared to the average California Chardonnay, quite high. And more than anything, I think that acidity, it sort of just alters or affects the way in which the finished wine might taste because of how ripe some of the vineyards we might wait for the sugar to rise a bit to kind of balance out the acidity. And it plays in different ways. Portola Springs is usually the wine most people think of as being the highest acid, but sometimes chemically Damiana is actually even higher, but the wines taste very different. So Damiana always to me has more extract and weight, where Portola Springs is, much more kind of lean and focused. So they might have similar acidities, but that one might taste more acidic than another. So they do express themselves a little bit differently that way.
Sandwiched between the ridiculous comments from my wife about how we should be wearing wigs and demands for cannabis-infused wine, Matt asks or makes a really interesting observation that a lot of our neighbors up here in the north end of the Santa Cruz Mountains are going for some really outrageously dense plantings, very, very tight spacing in the vineyards. And that is I wouldn't call it a trend. Maybe it is a trend, but whatever. That seems to be the arms escalation, is how tight you can space your vines and how narrow you can make your rows. And there are reasons for it, but like everything else in the world, you've got to balance practicality and what's workable against sort of an ideal. And man, everything up here is by definition and out of necessity hand farmed. And it's when these rows in these steep mountains and steep hills and little terraces, when they get really narrow, it becomes extremely it just becomes very difficult to farm. And we do need to keep the vines healthy and harvest the grapes. So we're probably never going to go as dense as some people.
Well, I think narrow is nice, but I think old vines trump any narrowness. So I'd rather have an old vineyard spaced wide than the young vineyard spaced really tight.
Yeah, we all, as Tommy was saying, when we develop new sites, like when we replanted Windy Hill, which is the Pinot Noir vineyard that's right as you enter the winery, you can see across from the pond. That is planted at 1 meter between the vines and 6-foot rows, and that's a pretty nice balance of high density, but also some practicality of farming. I don't probably need to tell you that farm labor in California is not easy to come by, and is certainly not inexpensive. So being able to balance, being able to use a tractor, because if you're farming, you can't farm a hillside vineyard at meter by meter spacing with a tractor. That just the technology doesn't exist. If you have a flat vineyard, there are some tractors that actually go over the row, but you're talking about a tractor that costs probably the better part of $1 million. So these things need to be practical as well.
Mary asks about the acidity in the wine and its ageability and the relationship there. And yeah, I think that's part of what has given our Chardonnays a really long life in the cellar in the past, but it's other things too. I mean, I'd like to let Nathan and Michael talk more about that, but they don't see a lot of oxygen during their élevage and time in the cellar. We don't stir, as Nathan mentioned. They're wines that are, a lot of our longtime customers that have collected these Chardonnays over the years, they do age them. It's kind of it's not uncommon to have people buy these wines. They'll buy a couple cases. One goes in the cellar, the other one gets used over the next year or two or whatever. Martella is invisible. Yeah, Martella has left his station. Who knows where he went?
Should we send somebody over to get proof of life? Is he all right?
Yeah, there he is.
Oh.
He is back.
If I do the pair here. There we go. I can see better with these.
Got a.
Did I miss anything?
So we've got questions in the general thread, and we've got questions in the Q&A section. Nathan, you want to answer Kurt's question in the Q&A?
Somebody asked, if we planted today with modern spacing, would you increase the number of vines by 3 or 4 times? I would say it's probably in the range of 3.5. I think when we replanted Windy Hill, we increased our spacing by about 3.5. So yeah, it's in that range. With the old spacing, you know, you're well under 1,000 vines an acre. And our new spacing, it's nearly 3,000 vines an acre. So that's kind of the direction that we go in. And we'd also train the vines a little lower to the ground. A lot of our real old vines are really high. So now we train them much lower to the ground. And with that tighter spacing, we can ask each vine to produce a little bit less fruit, but again, over a given area, produce, you know, maybe as much, if not more wine. So Matt Ryan asked, do we bottle mags or larger of Chardonnay? We do bottle magnums every year of Chardonnay. Not a lot, but a little bit.
What was the question Joy was asking about her son farming? I couldn't see it all.
He's asking how many plants per acre. So I would say on average, grapevines at the lowest would be, what do you think, Michael, 450?
That's
Like 10?
Yeah, that's pretty low. That's probably, Damiana's probably around that, huh?
I can do some.
You got the calculator. So I think
Quick math.
Damiana's like 8 by 12. I think that's around 450.
I think it's 6 by 12, isn't it? So Damiana is probably 600 vines an acre. And so Windy Hill, our new vineyard, which is 3 by 6, is 2,500 vines an acre. So there you go, a little over 4 times. And if you did meter by meter, which is you know, the tightest really you see in commercial farming, that's about 7,000 vines an acre, which is pretty wild. That's very tight. We get all the questions.
Well, Matt Ryan asked if we do large format Chardonnays, and yes, we definitely do. We don't do every single vineyard in large format, but we do quite a few of them, and that's at the request of a lot of the folks that like to age them, because it's those mags 1.5 liter bottles age really nicely. And we'll do a few extra large formats. Those are often done by request. Joy is here, and I know that we've done a few like double magnums for them for their library at home. But that's something we need to request, and then we'll do it. And yes, also at our open houses, Matt, we open library wines. We'll have a library wine or two at some of the events on a regular basis, and then we actually will do events that are strictly library wines too, maybe one a year.
Well, also not assuming, but 2021 will be our 40th anniversary. And I'm expecting Doherty Winery to have quite a event celebrating that time and opening a lot of those old wines.
Yep.
Specifically, 1981 Pinot Noir.
Yeah. I had an 81 Winery Lake Pinot Noir not too long ago, actually.
There's a 6 liter in the library.
There's a question from James that is it's an intimidating question, because it sounds almost like something that would involve like focus groups and planning and stuff. The question is, as baby boomers become less influential in premium wine, what are we doing to attract younger customers, I guess it is. And I mean, quite honestly, we're what you would call a product driven, you know, the phrases that aren't used in the wine industry, but we're driven by product a lot more than we are by sort of forecasting or market forces or whatever. We're trying to make really good wines that we are proud of, and we're hoping that we can find people out there with whom those wines resonate. But I got to be honest, we don't put a lot of conscious thought into sort of the generational change that's going on.
We lost Martella.
Yeah, he's pissed that we're not more concerned about the boomers. He's out of here.
Okay, boomer.
Yeah, who's going to be? Yeah, we invite everyone up. If we can't have people here by the time we have our 40th, we might not be here anyway. So we'll see you all then.
I got rid of Martella for the moment till he gets his Wi-Fi situation in order.
All right.
Boomer remover, Kurt Taylor says.
Out.
Kurt asked a good question. Are the yields in Windy Hill 3 or 4 times? And I would say no, not that, but they are certainly consistently a little bit higher than the old vineyards. We sort of massage and kind of manicure the crop to meet specific requirements. So it's not quite that much higher, but we'd always have consistently better yields in Windy Hill usually. Somebody asked about doing a 10-year vertical. That'd be ambitious, but I'm in. If you guys are down for it, we might need to take like the better part of an afternoon to do that.
To do it virtually. I mean,
maybe we should do something like that when we can actually see other human beings again in the hopefully near future. Now,
I'm looking at a question from Joy about large format Kent Berry single vineyard Pinot Noirs. Did we custom do a large format Kent Berry for you, Joy?
That's what
remember.
That's what we did for them, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. Have you had that yet? Yeah. All right. Yeah. So anyway, we will do one of a kind large formats for people who want them. It's kind of, I mean, it makes this fun. We operate, we work with a number of really nice vineyards, and we can do whatever people want from those vineyards if you ask at the right time.
Hey, Nathan.
Martell is back. All right.
My message tells me that you don't have my video because you oh, there we go. Thank you.
We want Bridget back.
You cut out on us, so I there you go. There you go. You're back. Welcome back.
I've been here all along.
What other any other questions about
Skyline Rosé?
Damiana, shit magnums.
Matt Ryan does ask about our oak history. And we did. Michael experimented with American oak for a little while. We have not always used French oak. Michael, you want to talk on that a little bit?
Well, actually, back in the 80s, I used quite a bit of American oak. Probably going into a little bit the 80s and 90s. American oak is a little sweeter oak, and it contributed to making the wines a little softer, a little richer, which was really the style in the 80s and early 90s. And then we started transitioning over to, actually, I originally started with French oak, probably the mid 80s. In the 80s, I started switching to American oak. I probably ran with American oak until the mid 90s. But then started switching back when Nathan came in 2004. We switched 100% back to American oak. Nathan being the way he is.
What's that supposed to mean?
Being a traditionalist, we switched 100% back to America. That's when French oak.
Yeah, I mean, there was still a little bit of American oak when I got here. I don't think there was a ton of it, but I always found the as you said, the sweetness in American oak, to me, kind of took a little bit away from the uniqueness of the wines, you know, the sites here. I think you, as you said, you did gain more richness and volume and body, but I think sometimes one of the things that makes the Chardonnays from up here so interesting to me was not necessarily the weight, but the complexity. I always thought the French oak did a little bit better job of showing the complexity. But as you said, in the 90s, you know, that was kind of the peak of the bigger is better kind of decade, right? I guess.
Everybody wanted big, fat, and oaky wines until they didn't.
I'm getting the feeling that this industry is sort of like a big pendulum that sort of swings back and forth.
There's a lot of fashion in the wine industry. Things come in and out of fashion all the time.
So there's some more questions about American oak. Will we ever do it again? I would say no, but never say never.
Hire me back, I might.
Matt Ryan says Ridge is all about American oak. Why do you think so many hate on it? I think that Ridge spends a ton of time and money on their, you know, the American oak that they get, I think is very different than what other wineries get. I think they buy their staves from the forests and they, you know, age the staves to their specificities. If you have the kind of weight that they have and time and money, yeah, you probably can get a lot better American oak. But I think the average person, when they buy American oak, doesn't quite get the wood needs to be seasoned really, really well. And that's not something I don't think that's easy for a small winery like us to kind of influence. There's a question about, do you buy different American oak barrels? And I think, Michael, you bought American oak from all over.
Yeah, we're buying American oak from Pennsylvania, Missouri. There's quite a few places where we buy American oak from.
All up and down the Appalachians, right? From Pennsylvania down to Virginia, right. Minnesota. Missouri is another big area for Missouri, I think, in Arkansas. It's also, I think, you know, it's a different species of oak. It's the barrels are produced differently. They're just, you have to have, to me, really, really, really full-bodied wines to stand up to, oftentimes, to the amount of flavor that American oak, right? I mean, American oak is, in my mind, maybe a little bit better for bourbon than wine.
Well, if you want the wines with a lot of oak influence, and you want to taste a lot of oak, American oak is a good way to go. You make a wine with oak character. The thing that really cracks me up these days is now I see people are bottling wine and saying that they've been aged in whiskey barrels.
I saw that as well. I was kind of confused by why anybody would want to do that, but
I mean, we were aging wines in whiskey barrels in the Central Valley in the 1970s, and not because we were trying to make a style.
Yeah.
We were really cheap barrels.
You were pioneers.
We were just ahead of our time.
God knows what else you guys were up to, Marcella.
There's a great photo. That's Damiana getting mowed. Actually, that's getting spaded there. That's been mowed.
I mean, our soil looks like that for about 30 minutes every year. You know, that's the spader's getting in there, the soil's kind of moist and it's fluffing it up. An hour later.
One of my favorite photos.
Yeah.
I can hear Bev. Tell her we said hello.
Sorry to talk over everybody there. I just get too excited.
Michael, you don't have any
photo. Lily has taken such great photos of the vineyard through the years. This is one of my favorite ones.
That's a great shot. Michael, you don't have any Langley Hill, do you? at home?
I do
Yeah. Tommy, I think, and I are going to taste Langley Hill and talk about that a little bit. You're more than welcome to hang out with us and pretend like you've got some.
I'll drink more Albutom.
I think, Todd, you ended up with Langley Hill instead of Damiana as well, yeah? Not Todd Suarez, but Todd Parmasek.
So 2017 Langley Hill. This is a third of the 4 single vineyard Chardonnays. This is the largest of the Chardonnay vineyards. It's a little over 5, just under 5.5 acres. And this is the second vineyard that was planted here. And Michael, you want to talk a little bit about the history of Langley Hill?
Langley Hill was actually planted in, the rootstock was planted in 1980 in the fall, right before I came. I came to work for Fogarty Winery in November. I think this vineyard was, the rootstock was planted like in October or September. I'm sorry, I take that back. It was planted more in the spring, but it was budded over in September. Rootstock was planted, it was budded in September and October. And then in 81, during the spring, things budded out. And we had only about 60% take. So then it was budded again in 81. And we completed the budding in 82. This is the largest vineyard, it's 5.5 acres. It's one of my favorite vineyards. It is, it's trained a little bit differently than the other ones. This is trained on when the vineyard was really young, it had a lot of vigor. So we used to train it on a bilateral cane with 4 canes. The bilateral is still there, but I think we've now been keeping maybe 3 canes or 2 canes instead of 4. But this vineyard has always been one of the better producers and one of the most consistent vineyards that we farmed.
Jack, you're asking how is the Langley different from the Damiana, and I think we'll answer that question gradually over the next few minutes as we taste it. There were different people got different wines a little bit, and a few got Damiana, a few got Langley Hill, so we thought we would taste them both. And Matt, no, the vineyards are not CCOF certified, and we probably won't do that for a variety of reasons, but we did not certify.
You should probably introduce that little rascal next to the bin.
That little rascal. I was looking for Martella again. That is Monty, my Jack Russell Terrier. He was procured because we love terriers, and we were sold on him based on the fact that he was quite a good rodent getter. He's now 11, and in his life he's gotten 1 gopher that we know of. There may be 2. He is excellent at stealing snacks, peeing on people's cars, bringing mud into the house, getting sprayed by skunks. He has a lot of skills, a lot of talents. Yeah, that's right. He tore the interior out of Alex Hume, one of our best customers. he destroyed the interior of his car. So, you know, net, he's been quite an asset to the company for sure.
And actually, he was hanging off my leg at one time.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, that's true. Monty is my dog, or my wife and I's dog. And my wife, when I married my wife, I got her dog Mishu in the deal. And Mishu and Monty have each bitten exactly one person in their lives, and that person is part of this panel. That's all I'm going to say.
Monty and both of them are very good guard dogs. That's all I can
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
They did their job, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I really, again, 17 is just a fantastic vintage for me. And this is one of my favorite vintages of Langley Hill. I always think Langley Hill is maybe the most balanced of all the wines. It has such an interesting yin and yang of richness, acidity. The fruit character to me is always a little more citric than tropical. I just really enjoy the way this wine feels today. And again, it's got that brightness and kind of zip that all the 17s have. Got some more pictures. How are the gravy shots? So Matt asked if 13 and 17 were different or similar. 13 was a drought vintage and pretty warm. 17 was cooler, much higher yields than 17. 13 was some of the lowest yields we've ever had. So the characteristics of the vintages were very different in the vineyard, but the wines, I think, actually are kind of surprisingly more alike than different. I don't think the 17s were quite as, the 13s had a lot of ripeness with the great acidity. 17, the ripeness is a little more balanced. I love the 17 Chardonnays. I would encourage you to, and it's like I said before, it's a vintage where we've had a lot of really low yielding vintages lately, partially because of the drought, partially because of poor weather in the spring. But 17 was a pretty generous vintage, and so it's great. We'd encourage you guys to get your hands on as many of the 17s as we can, because we actually have like real quantities of wine to sell.
A thing that I have really recently started to truly believe is, and this sort of runs counter to general opinion, I think, but there are a lot more really superlative Pinot Noirs in California, which isn't great for us, but the reality is there's just a lot of them. Really, really, really top flight Chardonnay to me is much harder to find. The lion's share of it's probably in the Santa Cruz Mountains, in my admittedly biased opinion. But I'm quite a bit surprised that the Santa Cruz Mountains don't get more attention for their Chardonnays than they do. Somebody made a comment that they're not thrilled about Pinot Noir in the 2017 vintage, but have not tasted the Chardonnays. I don't hate on the 17 vintage for Pinot Noir myself, but I do think that it is an exceptional Chardonnay vintage. I think I agree with Nathan on that one. So next Friday, somebody asks what we're tasting next Friday, and this is shameless plug time, I guess, for me, but we're gonna do 2016 Alma. They're both Lexington wines. So from a different label that we have, and it's from our vineyard that's 20 miles south. We're doing a Sauvignon Blanc Semillon blend from the 2016 vintage. Actually, the first Sauvignon Blanc Semillon blend we did. It's called Alma. And then we're doing 2014 Cabernet Sauvignon from down there. And to get those wines in your hand, give us a call at 851-6777, and maybe Dushan can put that into the field here, and also an email address where you can get more information on that. But our plan, of course, is to make the wines available to everybody, and then about a week later do one of these streaming virtual tastings where we get a chance to talk about them and talk about the history and answer questions and things like that. What we actually send, Todd, is, you know, it's a roll of the dice, man, like everything else in life. If this pandemic has taught us nothing else, then it's certainly taught us that nothing is guaranteed. But it is going to be 2014 Cabernet Sauvignon and 2016 Alma. I promise you. The fax number. I don't know. I don't know how to fax us. But I think, Dushan, are you going to be able to put something in the field? All right, the info is coming up, hopefully, to everybody. And we do want to continue doing this. I won't be bashful about saying it's important to us. This is one of the only ways right now we have to keep in contact with our customers and the people that like our wines. We're not, we don't rely on like billboards and signs on the sides of buses and delivery trucks and things like that. We rely on kind of constant personal contact with all our customers. So keeping this up is important to us for sure.
Should we maybe answer any final questions if anyone has them, or any comments? Just like to say thank you for all of you that have joined us and taken the time to make jokes and slag us off in the chats. That's if you see us kind of rolling over and laughing, it's because somebody has made probably a funny chat. But it's great for us to be able to connect with you guys in lieu of actually being able to see everybody. So this has been a lot of fun for us. So thank you all for participating. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, keep buying wine, and we'll keep tasting the wines with you every Friday.
And I assume that we got a lot more questions than you guys have answered. I assume you guys are going to answer those questions by email or something?
Well, let's look here. Maybe we missed a few. We did get some hail. It won't affect anything yet, David, because we haven't had any kind of flowering. So right now we're pretty bulletproof in the vineyard, but you know, we don't want that hail in a month. You heard we do have a little bit of Albutom left. We made a barrel and a half. So, which is a little more than typical. And there is Dushan, there's 20 cases of Albutom left or something. So there's a bit left. If you call the vineyard, you can get some. What other questions did we have there, Nathan?
I think we had a pretty good, we answered most of the questions. I'm just scrolling back to see if there's anything we missed, but I think between the two of us, we got most of the people's questions. If you have any final questions, shoot them in the Q&A now. Otherwise, I think we'll probably say our goodbyes, and we'll look forward to tasting the Alma, our sort of white Bordeaux blend, and then a little bit of Lexington Cabernet from the 14 vintage next week. So, yeah, Martello, you got any final thoughts?
Well, thanks for including me. I've really had fun, and it's nice doing it from home. So I don't have to worry about spitting the wine. I just drink it. Don't have to drive anywhere, and it's been fun. And just ask everybody to stay safe and stay healthy, and let's have a big party when all this is over.
Amen to that. All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week.